Okay, so I wanted to get started asking about coming up with the idea for the film and really getting started on writing the script. How did you approach really writing the story and getting the project going as the writer?
Yeah. So, at the time I was just graduating from Columbia. Of course, as every other filmmaker, I was trying to make a first feature that feels contained, feasible. So, a lot of the thinking goes to the concepts that have been tried and true, obviously. So this, walking and talking, romance. And obviously, I wanted it to be queer just because of my personal identity and my personal background and the desire of, making something that I didn't get a chance to grow up with. So that was kind of like the starting point. And then I really want to say, a lot of the, writing and like, the execution came from getting to know the actors and observing them, spending time with them, and rehearsing with them later on when we, approached principal photography, really sort of like fed back into, the writing and how, the characters were informed by their thoughts and their ideas, their feelings that came up during the rehearsal. So it was, the script was in like a shifting form until the very last minute, I would say.
And speaking also of the actors, how did you approach casting the film? What was it about the main characters in particular that really encouraged you to cast the actors that you did for the film?
Yeah, well, the casting process wasn't particularly easy, and it's an interesting one because we had Shu-Yi for Tori very early on, because she's friends with one of the producers, and we just knew she is our Tori. So I get to spend way more time with a character that I knew less about, to be honest, because like with my personal background and the fact that I've spent, the entirety of my adulthood in the US, I sort of like felt closer to the character of Asher at the moment. But just like looking, like talking to Shu-Yi and looking at her videos online and seeing how, because she has her like own interviews with her friends, her own podcast situation. That was just really informative for me to construct the character as a listener and as this person who's really magnetic. So I sort of just, really ripped that off from her character. But then when it comes to casting Asher, it was way more difficult than we imagined because we started on that in the U.S. and somehow we just couldn't, find the right person. Because for me, it was really important to, to have the Asher that's, like very showing the boisterous side, like the online personality side of her, but also like this person has to be likable. Like at the end of it, we have to side with her. I think that was my angle. And it wasn't easy, to be honest, for some reason. I mean, we had a lot of, great candidates, but then there came to a point where bilingual became an issue, it was either way, So it was I remember it was 3 weeks before we were supposed to start shooting and we didn't have Asher. And at the time I was already in Shanghai. We had all the locations locked. But then, I sort of had to say that, well, if we don't, have this person, we shouldn't film this because I know everything sort of like depends on the chemistry and, having like casting the right person for this film. But I guess, just like against all odds, a local filmmaker friend just sent us this video by Yvonne online. And in the video, she was really just, like chatting with friends or like talking about something I don't even remember at this point. But the most important part was she like really walked the fine line of being like boisterous but also very likable. And at the same time, she was code switching Shanghainese, not just Mandarin. It was Shanghainese, Mandarin, and English at the same time. And I think, seeing that video was just the moment we knew that she is a person. And she was living her best life at the time. She was, having her graduation trip. We sort of like convinced her to come back to film this. And I just like immediately dragged her into the rehearsals. And yeah, and I guess it became sort of like her first job.
Yeah. And speaking of the rehearsal process, how important was that in really creating the characters with the cast, and how much time did you have to work with them before filming and during filming in terms of the rehearsals?
Yeah, I had 3 weeks. I remember that very vividly just because, I got on a call with Yvonne, telling her that we would love to cast her, basically begging her to come back to Shanghai, please. She came back, I think in 2 days or something, and we just started immediately, because I knew there was no time to be lost. And I remember, because we had that time and because luckily the film is very much linear. So we had the luxury of rehearsing everything chronologically, and sort of like, I mean, I had the privilege to really like facilitate the first time they meet and just, kind of like seeing them getting to know each other, better while the characters getting to know each other. So it was really just a fascinating experience for especially a first time director to be able to do this. And they were just very very generous with their time and energy. They were very invested in the characters. They felt very free to speak up whenever something felt like, well, this is not me, or this is not how I imagined for the character. And we basically talked through like every single line, if not punctuation, just to, make sure, because we were like very low budget project, and just to make sure we get through the days,
Mhm.
honestly. And I do remember reading this book by an author. I couldn't remember who now, but I do remember I was reading this book about, rehearsing with actors, and the concept of improving is actually really tricky, because it's kind of like unfair to ask actors to improv really at the spot while they don't really know the lines. And the concept the book was championing was kind of about, you have to make these lines a part of the actors' bodies, and you can only ask them to improv on top of that, because they already know that they will have things to say, as opposed to asking them to make things up while like you as a director need to fill in the gaps. I do remember that was very enlightening to me, because the concept of improv has always been kind of like thrown around and just mistaken as this like magical thing that actors can do when you run out of lines or something. And that that book sort of like changed my perspective on it, and I really took that approach and just made sure for every single scene for the entire film they were prepared. They just like whenever you pick one line, the other person would know the next line. It has to become like a reflex thing. And then on top of that, during the shoot, I personally would feel more comfortable asking, well, for this take, would you want to try something else? As opposed to like asking them just to do something completely different. Uh, you know, that's not like based on what's already rehearsed.
And also, speaking of getting to film in Shanghai and finding the locations, and what was that experience like, and how did you find the locations where you wanted to film and really create the production design for the film?
Yeah, it was. I remember I went back a few months prior, and then it became this really collective effort, because we had local line producers, my first AD, who used to study at NYU, lived in New York, moved back to Shanghai, is from Shanghai. So it was really just a blessed team, and everyone was working so hard to, make the locations feel real and also at the same time, just possible for the logistics, obviously. And I remember specifically for the bridge, that overpass scene. That was kind of like the last one that we had to decide on, and we couldn't figure out, just like a good option. So I sort of just took, the very old school way of really trying to be in the streets all day, trying to look up in any car that I was, riding, just yeah, to like, scouting, to be scouting at any second. And I remember that overpass was sort of in, a more like remote area of the city. So we were able to pull that off, and visually at the end of it, it became my favorite scene, honestly. Yeah, and also for some of the other locations, like when it comes to like the school, the facility, it was really our local crew members' effort, which included like bringing me to their own elementary school, trying to see if that would work out, like walking every street corners possible. Yeah, like writing a letter to their grad school to see if we can like, cheat this dorm door as a gate, which eventually did happen. So yeah, it was really the local team's effort, I'll say.
Also, speaking of the producing team, how did you collaborate with the other producers in getting the film made as well?
Yeah, we had Inks and Soul, both producers, on board pretty early on, just because they both are very deeply rooted, in the queer and queer ally community. They've done, similar works, and they both kind of like straddle this, like U.S. China production experience very well. So yeah, it's really a dream team, kind of like pulling this together, and sort of allocate different workload among us because it is a lot to do for an indie film like this scale. But I think I think we just really believed in the project. And I remember like we were speaking of casting. At the end of it, the casting process was really just all hands on deck, kind of like searching for this person. And it was, producers ask friends, friends ask friends, that then we were able to find Yvonne's video basically.